And what we'll do is we'll record and share this out as well. I'm sure others will join, Ketty, as we get going, but if we want to start, I'll turn it over to you. I'll welcome our guests who have joined us today. Thank you so much for coming to our spring edition of our Lunch and Learn. This is exciting. We have a couple presentations this week and next week through Dr. Ketty Zhao's research team. Ketty's going to be hosting these events, so I'll turn it over to him to introduce everyone and to start us off. But thanks to everyone for coming. Just a quick note to keep your microphone on mute, and we'll make sure there's time for questions at the end. And I'll turn it over to you and your team. Ketty, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Cara. Can everyone hear me? Good. Excellent. So it's my honor to invite Dr. Izumi Sakamoto and Patricia Quan to be here to do our presentation for our Asian Heritage Month. So as you can see from the poster, we have two events lined up in this month. So the first one is about community organizing and advocacy for addressing anti-Asian racism. So I really benefit from this work since the beginning, back to my PhD journeys. I got a chance to really lucky to work with Izumi about this, and Patricia, like really passionate about social justice, equity, addressing anti-Asian racism. We do see lots of trauma during the pandemic because anti-Asian racism, and we really want to promote justice, equity through our research, working with committee members, guided by them. So it's my honor to welcome Izumi and Patricia here today, and I'll just open the floor to Izumi and Patricia. Please feel free to introduce yourself, because I feel maybe you guys have more things you want to share about yourself.
Thank you so much, Katie, for a nice introduction. Patricia, would you like to start introducing yourself?
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Kara. This is wonderful for this opportunity. My name is Patricia. Use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a PhD student at York University here in Toronto, Canada. I was an MSW student at the University of Toronto when I was working on this project. And I am a community organizer. I work with international students, particularly like high school international students. My academic work also centers around racialization, anti-Asian racism, and student migrant justice as well. It's nice meeting everyone.
Thank you, Patricia. And I'm Izumi Sakamoto, she, her pronouns. I'm originally from Japan. I'm an associate professor at University of Toronto, where I met Katie and Patricia. My work has focused on immigration, anti-Asian racism, working at Japanese Canadian communities. I'm also happy to say that Chinese Canadian National Council Toronto chapter has been so wonderful. So I have had a long working relationship with the CCNCTO and the current and past organizers are here in the room: Kenneth Lin and Florence Lee, and Katie himself included. So just very happy to also share part of the work with CCNCTO as well. And I'm invited guest here in Toronto. Also, I carry the Japanese imperialist legacy with me, coming from Japan, and so working with Asian communities in general brings up that legacy of imperialism. So that's something that I've been constantly working on and learning from. Thank you. Katie?
Well, thank you so much, Izumi. Thank you so much, Patricia, for the introductions. Let me share the screen first, so we probably can get started. And get started. And then if the audience have questions, we have a Q&A session at the end. Okay, so let me share the screen first here, and we can start this presentation. Can you see my screen now? It might be a little bit slow. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna put down presenter mode. You'll be able to see the whole screen. Good, working well, excellent. So yeah, so without further ado, let's have this presentation. Izumi, would you like to open this? Or Patricia?
Sure.
Okay.
So I can read. So this is about community organizing and activism for addressing anti-Asian racism during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's going to be three of us presenting, but the fourth person is Kenneth Lim, who has been the part of the team working for the past 2+ years on this. And previously, we're going to talk about this, but there was the another project Kenneth was also deeply involved in.
Thank you.
Next slide,
one.
please.
So this mural you are seeing here on the slide is actually from the First Nations house at the University of Toronto. The word Takranal means that where trees meet the water is the name that this place carried long before the colonizers decided to call it Toronto. And it's still the name this place carries today. Today me and Izumi are speaking to you from the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. This land is covered by Treaty 13, and the wider territory is held by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. We are here today to speak about anti-Asian racism and Asian community organizing, and our work exists on the indigenous land and within structures that continues to benefit the non-indigenous settlers, that includes many of us here today, through the ongoing dispossession and discrimination against indigenous communities on their own land. So throughout today's Lunch and Learn, I do want to invite us to consider what does it really mean for our organizing to be accountable to the land that we are on right now, and how can we build relationships that honor indigenous leadership while also addressing the specific realities of our own communities. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Okay, so the work that we're going to be presenting was funded partly by Richard Spling, our Work for Social Policy, through Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work, University of Toronto. And again, we would like to thank Kenneth Ling, who's the former advisor on anti-Asian racism and was the co-chair of the board of Chinese Canadian National Council Toronto chapter. Without her, we wouldn't have been doing this work. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of you in this room know really well, but anti-Asian racism is not a new phenomenon as of COVID-19 pandemic. So historically, Chinese immigrants came first, and then Japanese immigrants, East Indian so-called immigrants came to as part of the national agenda to have laborers come work in farms, build railroad, work in fishery, and so forth. And as you can see, white immigration was greatly without questions in so-called Oriental exclusion. Asians were portrayed as ugly and not civilized, and they were letting whenever needed, but not necessarily all the time. And their entry is very surveyed closely, like with Chinese head tax, or that families couldn't immigrate with the men who came here as laborers. Next slide, please. The case in point, so anti-Asian racism existed even before this, but 1907 was a pivotal year when anti-Asian racism came to the new height, so to speak. There was a riot in Vancouver that white mobs attacked Chinatown, and then Japantown, and Henry Tsang at Emily Carr University termed this as white riot, anti-Asian riot, and this Asiatic Exclusion League was formed as well. So that was sanctioned by a larger society as acceptable activity to discriminate against Asians. Next slide, please. So this is just a small segment of the history of anti-Asian racism. Chinese head tax was placed upon Chinese immigrants coming into Canada. And as you probably know, Komagatawaru was turned away at the shore of Vancouver. There's a Chinese exclusion act and Japanese internment, i.e. incarceration, that happened as well. So there was a long history of anti-Asian racism. And what is not shown here is that all this while anti-Indigenous racism was happening as Canada was expanding and taking over land and appropriating the lands and also displacing Indigenous peoples systematically throughout what was known to be Canada in the country. Next slide, please. Just because I study this area, so this is a history of Japanese Canadian mass incarceration. Again, this is just one example of long history of anti-Asian racism, but during the World War II, immediately after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in the US, 22,000 Japanese Canadians were uprooted from their homes along the West Coast and then sent to internment camps, incarceration camps or road camps. And after that incarceration ended, they couldn't go back to BC because BC didn't accept the Japanese Canadians back for another 4 years. So there was disposition, dispersal, and some people call it cultural genocide. Next slide, yeah. So now Asians in general seems to be doing well in the society. And model minority is a term we hear often, as in Asian Canadians are doing so well that they are not really minority. They are in schools in numbers, and to the extent that some white students didn't want to go to University of Toronto because there are just too many Asians. So that article came out in Maclean's magazine over 10 years ago. Too many Asians, Too Asian was the original title of that article. So model minority is the term, and actually it was coined in 1970s specifically to divide and conquer communities of color in the US to push down African Americans and Latinos, and by upholding Asian Americans so that they would not be able to complain, hey, you complain that you're a minority, but look at Asians. But also Asian Americans were said to be a model minority. So it was model, but also minority. So never be able to join the white majority. So it's also the very wisely, quote unquote, created term to control minority populations in the US. And that then was taken up in Canada as well and used widely in many different ways. Next slide, please. And as you know, going forward, COVID pandemic in 2020, March, sort of starting from 2019, December, we started hearing about it. And then this lockdown happened in March of 2020. And anti-Asian racism skyrocketed. And this is just one example. And we have more data from CCNCTO. And this culminated to next height, so to speak, in awful way, with Atlanta mass shooting on March 16th, 2021. And 8 people were shot dead, and 6 of them Asian women, and who happened to be working or visiting massage parlors in Atlanta. The shooter deliberately targeted Asian women. And this was truly shocking incident. And many people talked about this. And so this on the right side, Mihati Pham said the Atlanta mass shooter didn't have a sexual addiction because this was an excuse that Sheriff Chief used once the shooter was arrested, like, oh, he had the sex addiction, so he couldn't, as if that there was no, there was an excuse to have killed 8 people. But that's very, that's just not to be like it's just unbelievable that somebody in a position of power would say something like that. So this shooter had racist sexualized fantasies about dominating Asian women. In other words, he had fantasies of white supremacy and acted on them, name it. So underneath this fantasies is the white supremacy. So it's very important to see the structural issues that are underneath these, what seems to be an isolated instance. Next one, please. In fact, white supremacy, which is the term that had been used for many years but became more popularized with thanks to Black Lives Matter, white supremacy permeates through our society. And you don't have to be white to uphold white supremacy. It's an ideation and it's a system of power that is in our society. So, for example, colonialism, genocide, capitalism, slavery, war, anti-Islamism, anti-Islamophobia, ethnic cleansing, anti-Semitism, sexism, patriarchy, and I will say transphobia, homophobia, many forms of discrimination go under to uphold white supremacy and what is supposed to be normative. Next slide, please. So in that context, we had this first research project, what we then termed as 2020 in hindsight, intergenerational conversations on anti-Asian racism during the COVID-19 pandemic. Differently, the Atlanta shooting was impetus to do something about it because it was just so awful and so shocking that many of us jumped and wanted to do something. And this is the community-based participatory action research project, and the partners are Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work, which I'm part of, and Chinese Canadian National Council of Toronto chapter that has been named a few times, and Kenneth Lin and Jesse Tang are part of that organization at that time. So there's a report, there's the link to that later. So, and the report comes in English and Chinese. Next slide, please. And these members, Kenneth, I've been mentioning, is in the middle row on the right. And yeah, and Nikki Huang is also from on the bottom, yeah, is from CCNCTO. And other members were students, MSW students at that time, and Jesse Tang on the top left, who was the executive director at that time. And they have since moved on and they are working in the respective field. Next slide, please. So we all can come back to this. There's a slide at the reports in Instagram. And we're going to come back to Instagram later. So sorry that the letters got jumbled, but key findings or pervasive effects of anti-Asian racism, what we call as WUNAI, and participants across the board highlighted experience of WUNAI, which I'm not saying it right, but Patricia's gonna take over after me. So, which is described as a sense of helplessness at the difficulties they experience in life. Participants noted feeling the stigma of being Chinese during the pandemic, where aggressors blamed Asians for bringing the virus to Canada and being the first to adopt practices such as mask wearing, which quickly made them targets of discrimination and stigmatization. When faced with acts of anti-Asian racism, those who experienced WUNAI felt that the only choice they had was to stay quiet and bear it while continuing with their lives. Those participants with limited English fluency shared that their inability to speak English freely made it difficult to fight back against anti-Asian racism effectively, as well as understanding that they were being targeted with microaggressions. Participants had different views on the historical context of Unai. At the same time, it should be noted that some participants showed great resistance by continuing to keep on with work, school, and their lives, and as well as engage with the activism. And just to note that participants included teenagers to people in their 70s. Next slide, please, and Patricia.
Thank you, Izumi. So on this slide, we're just going to spend a minute looking at the concept at the center of both the 2020 in Hindsight project and the Beyond Unai project. So Unai is a Chinese expression that's really hard to translate cleanly into English. The closest word we have so far is hopelessness or helplessness, but neither of that really capture what it really means. Unai is a feeling born out of a unique situation called 无可奈何, and it means that knowing that you know that something is wrong, you know that you want it to be different, but you also know that there literally isn't much that you can do about it to change the situation. So it's a kind of a resigned happiness, a what can you even do feeling that lingers around beyond like independent incidents. So in both the Beyond Unai project and the previous 2020 in Hindsight project, Unai emerged across interviews as the dominant emotional response that Chinese Canadians described when talking about anti-Asian racism, especially during the pandemic. And in this project, we tried to map out what produced that feeling and what helped people to move beyond it and continue their advocacy work. So on the left side of the picture, the gray side, you can see the conditions that produce Unai, like the lack of anti-Asian racism educations in schools, so people don't even have the language and frameworks to talk about what's happening to them. The stigma of being Chinese or East Asian during COVID, when our communities were blamed for the pandemic. The internalized racism, the systemic discrimination, and the model minority myths that we talked about before, which all tells Asian communities that we shouldn't complain because we are supposedly doing fine. And all of this together makes Unai feel like a reasonable emotional response. Like if nothing changes when you speak up, eventually you just stop speaking up. And on the right side, the yellow side, is what the project fund helped move people beyond the feeling of Unai and actually takes more actions. So we have education and awareness and action for empowerment, hope for the future, like knowing that challenging anti-Asian racism, addressing anti-Asian racism requires generational work, that we are only setting up the groundwork for future generations of organizers to continue working on this issue. And Chinese solidarity means like building connections within the community as a foundation for collective response. And personally, I would also say that's a hope that we can stop fighting each other in our own communities and actually save up that energy and time to challenge the larger system. We will get into this intra-community dynamics in a little bit as well. Next slide, please, Katie. Thank you.
So I mentioned the Instagram, which we haven't been using much, so it's a little embarrassing. 12 followers and 2 friends, but 5 posts. But we're gonna start to populate a little more, and there will be linked to media coverage of our report that we released a couple of years ago, and what will come from this Unai component of the project. And next week, I'm also, Katie and I are co-presenting again on a different topic on anti-Asian racism, and about it focusing on the university students' experiences of anti-Asian racism. A 2-year study. It's a brilliant, the Maddie Mant, who's there, did the survey of university students starting from March of 2020, going forward for 6 waves, and tracked people's experiences of COVID-19, in it including anti-Asian racism, perceptions of anti-Asian racism. So we will be presenting on that next week. Next slide, please. So going back to Unai, how can the sentiment of Unai be addressed? Katie.
I can, thank you, Izumi. So I can talk about a little bit, regarding the community effort of addressing anti-Asian racism. This is the work like at the beginning of pandemic, CCNCTO, Chinese Canadian National Council Toronto chapter was doing at that time. So they start to realize how serious anti-Asian racism is, and then the negative impact that anti-Asian racism had during the pandemic. So they decided to collect all those incidents reported by committee members to show us how serious, how severe anti-Asian racism was during the pandemic. So as you can see here, the yellow highlight, this initiative started in 2020, like 6 years ago in March 10th, and it crossed the whole year till 2021. And just very shocking to see that less than 1 year, actually, a little bit less than 1 year, there were over 1,150 cases of racist attack across Canada. I reported on this web platform CCNCTO had at that time. And you can see those two websites here, and then those are collective efforts, both between CCNCTO and committee members to really try to see how does anti-Asian racism look like in the country, right? So there are some highlights here. For example, 40%, 44% of all cases of racist attacks and incidents were reported from Ontario and British Columbia. So that's pretty high numbers there. And when we take a closer look to the data, we can see that women represent close to 60% of all reported cases, and men are twice as likely to report a physical assault. So each group actually face different struggles when they encounter anti-Asian racism. And also when we talk about spaces where anti-Asian racism happened, for example, spaces in the food sector, grocery stores, restaurants, they were prominent sites of anti-Asian racism attack, and basically 1/5 of all racist attacks incidents came from those spaces. And we also talk about the language barriers within communities here. So for those individuals who reported incidents in Chinese, they were much more likely to report suffering from emotional distress and experiencing physical assault than those who report incident in English. So you can see how language barriers actually shape different experiences when you encounter anti-Asian racism. So this is just one of the so many work CCNCTO has been doing. And if you're interested, CCNCTO website has been showcasing all the committee work they have been doing since the beginning. And then we also have different initiatives, different programs ongoing right now, like a youth leadership and intergenerational conversation, connection between older generation Chinese immigrants and younger generation Chinese immigrants. They came together and then promote social justice, equity for this community. And I also have Chinese labor, the Chinese laborers in Canadian labor market, how we should protect them from being exploited, etc., etc. And yeah, so I just want to showcase this report here. And if you're interested, please feel free to check the CCNCTO website.
Kenneth then just had to leave, but actually this is the work Kenneth really worked hard toward. And so in addition to the data collection that Kenneth was heavily involved in alongside with other members of CCNCTO, like Justin Kong, who was the executive director at the time, this work, Kenneth really stepped in to do this within like a week after Atlanta shooting. United Against Anti-Asian Racism rally, Toronto, on March 28th, 2021. It was just a huge turnout, and many Asians showed up, but also allies showed up as well. And it was a beautiful rally to drive the message home that anti-Asian racism is not acceptable in any form. Next slide, please. And they, in a short time period, were able to mobilize many organizations, Filipino organization, and indigenous elders, and Butterfly Asian and Migrant Sex Workers Network. So there are two people on the bottom right. That's Amy and Avi Go from CCNC SJ Social Justice. Kenneth is shown speaking on the top right. And so Asian women taiko drummers was setting up to drum on the left bottom. So just it was a huge turnout, huge event, very effective, and taken up by media. And yeah, next slide, please. So as you can tell, there are activism efforts happening in many different ways. So that data collection, that's CCNCTO, and later with Project 1907 they did, and the rally that you just saw. And there are many, it's different kinds of things that are happening, talks about it, like a seminar or a gathering, spontaneous gathering, and many things are happening here and there. But those threads are not necessarily connected together. So Kenneth and the ED at the time, Justin Kong and I wrote this research proposal, which was then funded. And the first thing we did was to do internet search on examples of activism on anti-Asian racism. Patricia and Katie jumped into this process and collected. I looked at, I don't know, thousands of pages of stuff, and couldn't really find many examples. So that led us to narrow our focus on interviewing organizers, so identified activism groups and organizations. And so CCNCTO, as we know, was doing this. So two people interviewed from CCNCTO, Butterfly, Asian Migrant Sex Workers Network. Asian and Migrant Sex Workers Network was also doing the work, so we interviewed them. Project 1907 is a voluntary group in Vancouver that started by two people who are involved as activists, and a few other student organizers and groups that we were able to get hold of. And that's not the exhaustive list, but we wanted to get the essence of what was going on by interviewing these people with semi-structured interviews and get the idea of what they did and how they did it. Next slide, please. So we are still elaborating on findings, but difficulty in finding documentations of activism fighting against anti-Asian racism was one of the issues. And so that means that pointed us to the lack of sustained funding and sustained structure. So there's a momentum wanting to do something, but when momentum is lost, you need to go back to your own regular life. And also lack of personnel or volunteers who can be involved for a long time. So you can do it for a few months, but I have a baby at home, or I'm busy with exams. So also student groups which receive funding, then that's great that they were able to do something. And after the funding was over and the people have graduated, they could no longer sustain, or that they would just call it like, okay, that was it, and we're gonna go on, move on. And there are also many one-off seminars, actions, conferences of people from different organizations. For example, University of British Columbia had the Anti-Asian Racism Forum, and that was a two-day forum. And also University of Toronto had one like that too. And charitable organizations may not want to appear too political. There's this advocacy, fear of advocacy. Like if you are seen as doing too much advocacy, your funding could be cut, which we saw happen during the Harper era. And that really sent the chills, advocacy chill to the service providers. And as a result, at least on the surface level, it seems that only a few organizations are addressing anti-Asian racism, because on internet search, we don't see many. However, and also organizations that have always focused on advocacy and anti-racism may be the only ones that are foundable on the internet. So like this NCTO, Project 1907, and some other advocacy organizations, maybe the ones that we could find. But in our search to put the parameters down, boundaries clear, we only focused on mainly Chinese Canadian organizations. And not to say there are not other organizations, other communities that are doing the work, but since it was hard to find things and to do justice to many other communities, it have been difficult. So we just focused on Chinese Canadian organizations to as a starting point. Next slide, please. So one such example is on-campus student organizing. So I'll pass out to Patricia.
Thank you, Izumi. I'm aware of time, so I may cut through one slide during my section. But yeah, in this section, I'm going to walk you through one example of the community organizing that we included in the Beyond Online projects. This is also a case that I was personally involved in and the one I ended up writing my master's thesis on. So this happened February 2022 when I was still an MSW student at UFT. It was around Lunar New Year and Spring Festival, arguably our biggest cultural celebration in the year. So a friend of mine who was living in the graduate residence sent me a picture. The residents had distributed red envelopes to celebrate the new year, which in itself is a really nice gesture because in Chinese culture, red envelopes symbolize prosperity, blessing, and harmony. But inside the envelope was something called joss paper money or ancestor money, as you can see in the picture on the right side. For those who are not familiar with Chinese culture, joss paper is something we burn for our deceased ancestors. It is how we symbolically send money to them in their afterlife. We burn it during festivals like Qingming when we remember family members who have passed away. So giving this to a living person can be interpreted as like wishing death upon them. It can feel like a curse. And if you can, you probably cannot see, but like on the paper note, you can actually see like literal words of a hello banknote printed on them in English. So it would be hard to miss if you look at the notes that you are putting it in the red envelopes. So for students who understood the cultural meaning, especially for Chinese backgrounds, receiving this in the middle of our biggest cultural celebration felt honestly like a death threat. So when my friend sent me that picture, we were all in shock, but pretty quickly we pulled ourselves together and drafted an email to multiple departments at the university trying to explain what had happened, the cultural meaning behind it, and the harm it can do or it's doing already to students with Chinese background, especially during the pandemic and in the middle of xenophobia and anti-Asian racism, and asking for a response. I was expecting this to be maybe an internal reply, but I shared this email with a couple friends. They shared it further. Within a few hours, the email started circulating and it ended up going viral on Chinese social media. And that's when a group of us decided to come together to do something, including like launching a petition to call for a public response and apology from the university. Next slide, please. A few things to say about who organized and how. So the team that formed was predominantly international students with Chinese cultural backgrounds, speaking Mandarin and or Cantonese. The organizing happened almost entirely online. Part of that was because the moment that was during the pandemic, only some schools and workplaces had gone back in person, so online was simply more accessible. The other thing that shaped is also safety. We were Asian international students, and the precarity of our legal status was on our mind the whole time. We were very wary of having our identities publicly exposed. I have a slide specifically for this later, but for now, that concern shaped a lot of our tactical choices. I didn't really have a choice myself because my name and email were attached to the original email that went viral online. So I ended up having to be the public-facing person when external folks needed someone to talk to from the team. But for most of the team members, staying anonymous was a very deliberate strategy that they chose. The main tactic we used, the main thing we did is the petition, writing it and getting people to sign it. The writing happened overnight in a single Google Doc, and it was honestly amazing to watch like 13 different people typing in the same document at 2 in the morning. we push it out across WeChat groups, Chinese and English speaking social media. The petition picked up over 12,000 signatures in 2 days. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the slide that I will cut, but the main idea is that the digital platform that we chose to use for our petition is also turned into a thing that exposed us to harm that we had not anticipated for at all. But next slide, please. So we'll cut this. So yeah, the thing I want to talk about is structural conditions that we were organizing inside of. I want to discuss the conditions that made the work harder than it needed to be. So first, the institutional response itself reveals how the system is set up to handle or not handle at all something like this. We do have EDI office at the university. They send out emails after the incident, but the content of those emails were essentially, we acknowledge this happened. We know it's harmful. Here are the mental health resources if you need them. And that's it. There was no investigation communicated to the student. There was no accountability process, no follow-up on what would change so this does not happen again. The institutional responses treated this as something students just need to recover from and get over this, rather than something the institution actually need to answer for and make a change of. Second, on our side, most of us actually had never organized anything like this before. We didn't really know what we were even entitled to ask for as students impacted by this incident on campus. What is a reasonable demand? What is an unreasonable demand if there is one? Who do we escalate to? How do you actually run a petition? None of that has been explicitly taught. Can I say that? Even in programs training for future agents of change. So we were figuring it out in real time on top of placements, assignments, and also recovering from this incidents. So this labor, the invisible labor of working out how and what to even ask for, like fell entirely on students and not being discussed at all. Then there was also no protection for student activists. There's a Chinese saying which translates to the bird that sticks its head out gets shot. That was on people's mind for real reasons. Like for international students like us, the risk of being publicly identified are heightened. We had visa status to think about. We had academic standing to think about. We had families in China and other home countries who may not be supportive of what we are doing here in Canada. The university had no mechanism to protect us from any of that. Even for the mental health resources that the EDI office shared with us, we have to question what might the mental health professional think of us, especially given that this incident already happened inside the university, and we already have people making fun of us of our experience online. So we had to build our own resources, which mostly meant mutual support inside the team, which is another huge invisible emotional labor, and trying to stay anonymous, which is hard once your story is already in the news and all over social media. Next slide, please. So intra-community tension, this one, the Beyond Wunai project actually also found this to be a reoccurring pattern within community and community organizing efforts. There are always disagreements about how to respond, about like what's even worse getting upset about and getting organized against. So what my case adds to this tension is that it wasn't just happening within the Chinese Canadian or Asian Canadian communities here in Canada. Many of the most harsh comments, the ones telling us that we were ungrateful, that we were embarrassing our home country, that we deserve what happened to us, were coming from inside our home countries on Chinese-speaking social media. And there were also comments targeting the Chinese international students specifically for just being international students in Canada. Like people saying things that you bought your diploma, implying that we were just rich kids who couldn't get into Chinese universities, that's why we're here, and saying only bad students go abroad and you want all the benefits, meaning that we want to keep our Chinese citizenship while also living comfortably in the West. And some parents in China also pressure their children to withdraw from the petition once they know of this incident. So when we are talking about racism against Asian communities in Canada, what this case specifically suggests that for international students advocating for against anti-Asian racism here in Canada, the analysis cannot really stop at the Canadian border. Next slide, please. And this brings me to talking about legal status precarity, which I think is the most missing from existing literature. So international student advocates in this organizing effort sit at least like 3 different kinds of vulnerability. We experience racism in Canada the ways other Asian Canadians do. We are institutionally precarious, like we are students with limited power inside our own university when we are trying to challenge the university's action, when the university itself was the perpetrator. And we are also legally precarious. Our rights to be in Canada is tied to a visa that can be revoked, while our belonging in our home country is often questioned. So that double discrimination is why anonymity emerged as such a big theme in my thesis. The students I interviewed didn't just want to be anonymous for usual privacy reasons. They wanted protection from threats coming from multiple directions in multiple countries all at once. And I think this is also why academic literature has often described international students as passive or non-confrontational. If we're only looking at what's explicitly publicly visible, what people have processed already, they're willing to say with their full names and identifiable information attached to that, you will miss the other engagement that's also happening, but just in a very constrained way. The students in my study were engaged. They just couldn't always do it loudly nor leave a contact information. So part of what I'm trying to do in my community academic work right now is to push back on how narrowly we tend to define organizing and resistance. We default to like thinking about rallies, public protests, the loud, the visible stuff. They are very important, but East Asian communities has always resisted in other ways too, like ways they are quieter, they are less publicly and institutionally legible. And why don't those get counted as resistance and political engagement? Next slide, please. And just to close, despite everything we've described, the student team continued, and we got a public response from the university eventually. Many of us are still doing this kind of work in different fields today. And what sustained then, based on what they told me, was a few things. Like we have the framing, we have the language to understand what happened as a part of the system, not just a personal unlucky story. We have each other, we have the peer support inside our team, and being part of the longer tradition of Chinese Canadian organizing, knowing that we weren't the first one, nor will we be the last one, really helped. So the line I want to leave everyone with is this: international student engagement in social action is happening, just not being picked up by academic literature. It is real, it is ongoing, it is structurally constrained in many ways that often make it invisible and illegible. And moving beyond Unai requires taking seriously and challenging the conditions that make those non-action feels rational in the first place. Thank you. Next slide. Izumi?
Yeah, so to conclude, so it showed up in Patricia's example of international students taking actions as well. But despite difficulties, resistance and advocacy do happen in different forms. So that's and importance of archiving and documenting activism, resistance and advocacy efforts against racism and structural oppression in general cannot be overemphasized. So when activists are too busy doing their things, and when their action finishes, they will move on. But then we don't have many things that are left to work with. But over, the past 150 plus years, people have been doing things to push back the system or oppression. So getting to know what has happened and how people have done it is very important. And in doing so, it's also important to recognize that not everybody can act, not everybody can push back because of precarious legal status that Patricia talked about. It's not worth losing your student status, for example, or that or job security might come into play as well if you're non-status. And so there are many intersecting factors that are involved. And also just in general, raising critical consciousness is very important. So noticing something is not right, and like, that's some weird, so that it could show up as a discomfort in you. So emotion can be a guide because you're wiser than you think, or we are all wiser than we think. So emotion may be telling you, something's not adding up. So holding on to that for a while, and then when you have a chance to explore that, that which then involves cognitive processes, and then once you are clear on what's going on, you can take a step, and you don't have to do this alone. You can do with other people who share the concerns. And you don't have to also focus on single issue either. There are other people who are working on other issues. For example, anti-Asian racism may be experienced by youth who have mixed heritage. So then Black and Asian, the heritage, it's like in my other research, youth with Black and Asian heritage are talking about they're just read as Black. So there are different kinds of things that they get as Asians, in terms of racism, but also Black racism affects them. So the intersection of these identities and oppressions, like if you appear gay or trans, you might be targeted even more. So if you're old or may not speak English, you may be targeted more. So thinking about that vulnerability within the community, and it would be also important as well. So raising critical consciousness is something that we'll continue to do. And I would like to end with one ask what actions do you take out of this? What kinds of things would you like to do next? And what have you done? And have you documented that? And if not, then how do you do that? And we are actually documenting anti-Asian racism, so we're happy to talk to you too. And contact, so that Instagram account, which is to be more populated, is at Hindsight in 2020 project, which is a mouthful, but and this has been by Patricia Quan and myself, Izumi Sakamoto, and Katie Zhao, along with Kenneth Lin, who couldn't be with us for all of the presentation, but she was part of this research project. So thank you so much for listening. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions, if there are any.
Thank you. Thank you, Izumi. Thank you, Patricia. Do we have any questions? Well, I do have a question because I've been following this since the beginning and then also part of this project. Ever since I started my job here, I do see some struggles faced by Asian communities in Saskatchewan, but because the number is small, so I wonder if Izumi or Patricia have some kind of insight into how we should, inspire people even when you're having small, not powerful enough, strong enough, how we should start to do this. Is any ideas on that?
I'll let Patricia answer first, if you like, or if not, I'll answer.
Thank you. That's a really good question. I mean, right now I'm working with high school international students, and we are small in number. I do want to say that small in number does not mean that we are small in terms of strategic priorities. So I'm not really sure. I don't really know the full picture in Regina right now, but there are, well, first of all, there are other ways to collaborate with, or I don't want to blend, okay. There are ways to build solidarity with other ongoing movements that may be going on already. For example, I know that CCNCTO has been working with like migrant workers and advocating for migrant workers' rights. So maybe that's something that people can look into, or I like to start my organizing effort looking at what other issues can we collaborate on. And that's what's popping into my brain right now.
Yeah, when the number is small, thank you, Patricia. It's hard, but also social media has been strong as a tool for organizing. So once you start putting out your grievances, you might be able to make friends, or you find somebody who are talking about something similar, then you can connect to that person. But if you, without other people who are expressing the similar things, it's hard to talk about it as well. So finding a friend, finding a colleague who can share the concern would be a great start. And that, for example, when I was in Michigan as a student, there are not many Asian queer students. So the group I was part of had South Asian, Chinese, Filipino. So there was a multi-Asian queer group. And so it really helped, even though the particular issues that we are dealing with might have been different. So sometimes when your group is small, you might have to broaden the reach of the identification, but and understanding that very issues that you're fighting with may be different, but you can still share some of the concerns.
Thank you, Izumi. Thank you, Patricia. Oh, Amanda and Rebecca, nice to see you here. Would you like to ask any questions? Or Amanda is our faculty member too, Izumi, associate professor here. She's actually specializing in anti-racist education in schools.
Oh, wow.
Oh, Amanda, you're muted.
Thank you
Okay.
so much for that introduction, Kenny, and thank you so much for your presentation. There were so many points that I would love to learn more about, and I look forward to reading more about your project. I was wondering if you have any specific recommendations for faculties of social work, and where faculties of social work can come in more in supporting international students, specifically the community you focused on. Because I know that's something that keeps coming up in our meetings is basically a pattern of students, racialized students, feeling as if they are not being supported in their faculties of social work. And I think it's something that's going to come up at our next meeting. So
Thank you so much for this question. Sorry, Izumi, I'm gonna jump in right now. There is a book that literally just published, I think 2 months ago. I'm grabbing it right now. It's called, you can't see it. It's okay. You can't see it. And I'm hearing myself. This is very awkward. I'm sorry. Can I mute someone? Okay, great. It's called Not Your Cash Cow, Not Your Scapegoat, Student Migration and Canadian Universities. I'm gonna type this into the group chat later. It's a book that I'm reading right now, and I think it's helping me in terms of like looking at how universities as an institution can like put priority and thinking about like the barriers beyond language and cultural barriers that international students are facing. I'm gonna type that into the chat later. That's number one. Number two is I still believe that there will be difference in terms of student challenges faced by international students in Toronto versus in like Regina. So I would always advocate for having student groups, student councils involving international students like very directly in your decision-making meetings. I would always advocate for that. And did I answer that question?
I think that it would be nice to have focus.
yeah, I really thank you for responding to the question. I certainly don't want to be the person that says, well, oh, what can we do? And I realize that faculty, we have our own work to do in regards to closely studying the research and what is available, but that really gives some really, I think, very concrete starting points. And I will definitely take up those suggestions. And Patricia, are you able to, did you put that book in the chat?
Yes.
I'm just looking.
Yes, I just did. That's a very long name, but it's there.
Ah, okay. Okay. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Izumi, you would like to share?
Sure. I worked as the self-appointed international student coordinator for many years, and I'm happy to just talk with you. Also, I'm going to be at CASWI conference, so if you're there, we can talk as well. And Katie also was an international student, so I'm sure Katie has ideas as well. But yeah, and I myself was an international student in the US. It's just international students tend to be always the afterthought. Like, okay, apply for these, fellowships. Oh, oops, international students can't apply. Or like, come to this. Oh, oops, international students can't do this. So somebody who can really think ahead for international students or with international students would be great. And mentoring helps as well. So if you can pair or create small groups for mentoring, or buddy system, which exists in many ways in schools of social work, but particularly for international students. When I was the coordinator of international students, I had the orientation, like welcome session that invite everybody in the school, and have some of the, not treating them as not knowing anything, but treating them as some people who have had different kinds of experiences, bringing knowledge and experiences from different countries that are different. So then I'm having not just downloading, this is what you should know, but also creating the atmosphere of two-way learning processes is something that I think that it will be important. At the same time, Canadians got social systems, like how the government operates, who are the senators, what's a Senate, what's a parliament, is there sort of a Democrat the parties, political parties in municipal levels, or why not? And there's just some bits like who is the Queen's representative, King's representatives? Why do you need it? Like there are some things that people take for granted that are not, common sense for international students. So some of the stuff that you can teach in the first time, like in beginning of the semester, beginning of the year, would be helpful. And as well as ongoing sort of help with the writing or culture within the classrooms and when to raise hands. And one of the things I repeat often is that many countries where, including Japan, if you understand, well, if you're a good student, you understand everything. So then you don't really keep asking questions to other instructors. But that's not the case. And also asking for extensions for the assignments is so embarrassing for many, or not like unthinkable for some international students. So normalizing that thing and those things, and just making sure that they would just talking about what may be different and showing the way. And I think international students who have gone through that already can be the best mentors in that way too. So recognizing that, and it would be nice to have an online group for international students in social work, stuff like that, so they can support each other too. Sorry, like I'm just saying lots of things, but I hope that helps. And I'm happy to talk more. And I'm sure Katie has some more things to say. And I'm seeing that I think Rebecca had a question as well.
Rebecca, do you have a question for Izumi or Patricia?
Yeah, my question was more along the lines of what Amanda had said, but on the micro level in regards to students. What can we do? And like this is completely new in my wheelhouse. I have the pleasure of taking one of Professor Sakamoto's courses this summer because I've been in the social worker field, and yes, I have ties to immigration and working with some aspects through Children's Aid Society and other organizations. But it's like, again, I was born and raised here. You don't know what you don't know. And just being introduced through my undergraduate to a peer who is a good friend now who works at the 519. So assisting immigrants that are queer, refugees, just what do we do on this level that outside of advocating, like even hearing the recommendation for thinking about when we're doing programs, but international students aren't allowed to participate for whatever reason. It's kind of similar to looking at certain aspects or concepts as an afterthought, like disability, like we need to make sure we're more inclusive. So, or I'm going to land this plane. Hold on. So, what can I, as a student, someone on the ground, learning alongside many, many varying bodies, do to support outside of, attending things or ensuring that I'm incorporating considerations that might impact directly international students?
Katie, would you like to answer?
Well, thank you so much, but Rebecca, this is a very good question. Off the top of my head, I think there should be more, like I think it's a co-learning process as well. Like instructor and students, they have to learn together, like how to understand racism, like expressions, formations, like, how we should deal with together collectively. So there's a piece of co-exploration, I think we might need to emphasize. So in the class, especially in my class, I will try to tell students that each person brings in unique lived experience. And I'm here to learn as well, like we can explore together, but by no means like I'm superior than you because we're all knowledge creators, right? So I don't know the students' personal background, the stories they had when they grew up. I would love to open to learn and also have this conversation, have these interactions. We might be able to actually enrich, practical practice guidelines, frameworks, theories, etc., etc. So that's what I have off the top of my head. Amanda, please go ahead.
So I hope it's okay that I want to share something, and I'm so curious, Ketty, Patricia, and Izumi, what you think about this. But so Rebecca, in listening to your question, I guess what came to mind for me is what I've seen is a pattern of difficulties that I've seen in regards to group work and how international students have shared. So this is anecdotally, and I know it's also in the literature, but like the stress and the tension that group work can cause in the classroom, often because other students are excluding them and they're not valorizing their contributions in group work. And so I know as an instructor, I've tried to employ various strategies, but I've often thought about how it has to come from the students in the classroom as well. So I'd like to take some leadership in that. So just anecdotally, from what I've seen, I feel like that could be very impactful if you took leadership in that regard to even speaking to the instructor or really being intentional in how you're working with international students and how they're being welcomed into group work and fully valorized for their contributions.
Okay, I can start. I'm just going to, okay, great, thank you. I was gonna mute you, thanks. Okay, something popped into my brain. That's a really good question. Thank you. Thank you too so much. I'm like so grateful for professors and workers like wanting to know more about international student and like adapting their class. So appreciative of that. And I'm currently I'm just a TA at York University, so I do like teach like international student, and I was an international student throughout high school, undergrad, master, and now PhD. I'm finally not international student anymore in PhD, but I do feel like the biggest challenge I had when engaging in group work is that we have very different definitions of like what counts as a contribution and what's a like an easier way for us to contribute in the group work. Like for me, I definitely prefer we jump to the question, we figure out responsibility, and I just do my work and we will combine our work together. That's how I work. That's how I prefer to work. But it may not always be like that. That's not the Canadian way of doing group work. There's small talks. There's like figuring out iteratively like what's going on in the group and who's doing what part, and then you have to work with others to do your part. You can never like work alone. You have to be in conversation like all the time. So one thing I helped my student this term they find that helpful is that I had like a sheet of resources, or not resources, a sheet of working styles, and I distribute that to students and made it very clear that different people, it's okay to have different work style, and they are all legible. They are equal, like they are counted as contributions. They should be counted as contributions, and it's hard learning to work with others with different learning working styles, but that's just one skill that you need to have if you want to move into workplace. So I feel like making explicit that yes, we want to recognize that there are different working styles, and yes, like professors can help you or TAs can help you figure out how to work with different people with different working styles. Like that's one thing that helped my students, at least like from my student feedbacks. I don't know if that helps.
Izumi, you have anything to add before we conclude? Oh, Rebecca. Izumi, please go ahead if you want. Oh, sorry.
Do you
Go
want to
ahead.
go ahead, or I'm just going to, I think as a student, as a recipient rather of someone that's had to engage in lots of schoolwork, a lot of people say they don't like it. I do caregiving, and I have an 8-year-old. I'm telling him I have to do school group work, and he's like, oh, I hate that stuff. I think something that's important if you are implementing it, especially with people from such diverse backgrounds, is to encourage like icebreakers or some sort of opening where they can kind of see where they connect and disconnect, which I've done with a lot of my groups based on my history, and it gives people an idea of what their overall goal is. And sometimes I come into a group and I'm like, I want an A+, and we need to get an A+. And it sets a fire under some people, and some people will be like, that's great, this is what I can contribute. But it's just finding that what you connect around and don't connect around is also really helpful.
Thank you. I'm going to just quickly, so these are all great. Thank you, Rebecca, for coming and also contributing. Yeah, so Patricia also had great points. So undoing the common sense or unpacking the common sense is also very important. Class participation or participating in small groups. There are certain ideas about what that constitutes. If you grew up in Canada and have been to schools here, but people might have different ideas about that coming from different cultural or political backgrounds. So just making your expectations explicit whenever possible really helps. As well as, yeah, like what Rebecca said, just breaking down like different the tasks that are involved, or and then what Patricia said, that different kinds of contributions can make up the group work. So just reiterating whenever possible that there are different ways of contributing, and group work is not just one thing, but also intervening whenever possible too. So that's and icebreakers. at the bottom of it, at the sort of heart of it, is getting to know each other a little more deeply. Then you have a little more tolerance for each other's peculiar sort of demeanors or ways of doing, or instead of getting irritated, you might become curious, like, why do you do that way? And then if they have built enough of the relationships to be able to speak to each other, talk to each other, I'm just curious, why did you do that way? I'm just curious, why do you not talk at all? Then that might lead to something else too. So just building in team building or like activities, getting to know activities like over and over again through different learning goals, I find to be important. And talking about it explicitly about differences that people bring in, and not your way is not everybody's way. Yeah, and it's great that their common sense is challenged, because that will be challenged whenever they start working outside. And that work will continue to happen. And this is their chance to undo what they thought was common sense, and realizing that, oh, why did I think this is the case? So yeah,
Thank you.
you're
Thank you,
welcome. So,
Izumi. Well, we're a little bit over off the time now, so I would just like to conclude the event. Please feel free to reach out to me, Patricia, and Izumi if you have any questions. And then, yeah, we also have next events next Thursday, right? So, yeah, we'll definitely waiting to come back and talk more about anti-Asian racism and other stuff. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. So I'm gonna end the events and see you around. Okay. Bye.